AJ, over to you then, please, if you're happy to.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just share my screen. A moment. You just let me know once you can see that.
Yep, got it.
Perfect. So this is a topic that I kind of want to cover off today. It's a question, well, it's a topic that's more kind of operationally focused, I suppose. It's a question that I asked myself several years ago. So is network evidence really needed for security operations? I actually asked myself the probably more brutal and abridged version, which is network security monitoring dead as a practice within organizations? I'm going to go through a couple of slides. That's kind of the journey that I went through as someone who's a network engineer at heart, classically trained Cisco guy. That's my background. Network security monitoring was always built as a practice into the types of networks that we would design and architect for organizations. But this cyber community has very much changed the way that they think about security, I would argue in the right way, which is moving from the network as the security perimeter more towards the endpoint, looking at defense in depth with the likes of zero trust and other blueprints. And as that really led to the death of network security monitoring as a practice, and that's really kind of what I want to cover off in the next 15 minutes or so. Any questions as we go through, feel free to just drop them in the chat or come off mute. I'm happy to answer questions as we go through or towards the end. That's just my ego on a slide, so we'll jump past that. But these are the kind of topics that I wanted to delve into. So I want to provide some context of the early days of networking and also the early days of network security monitoring, and then kind of where we are today with the perfect storm of the rise of cyber threats and also the complexities that we see in networks, both within everything from the small to medium business all the way up to the very large enterprise. And then what we can kind of do as a collective to address maybe some gaps that we see within a good security monitoring program. Why network evidence hopefully continues to matter, and then some ways that we can modernize collection of evidence that can be used for the likes of incident response, threat hunting, or just network defense or organizational defense in general. So for those of you that don't have a networking background, I'm just going to quickly provide some context. So the early days of networking, kind of when I came into networking in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s, networking was a lot more simple than it was today. It was typically client server based. You kind of did your security at the perimeter, the network perimeter, with the likes of firewalls. And we didn't really have much Wi-Fi. There was no mobile devices really, especially not the iPhone didn't really come into play until 2006, 2007. Certainly no IoT or very little IoT or OT. So it was a much simpler environment to defend against. It was a much simpler environment to monitor and understand what was going on. In terms of simplicity, there was next to no encryption. Now, there's a lot of numbers that are banded around nowadays in terms of how much of network traffic is actually encrypted. I see everything from 75% to 90% in terms of amount of traffic that is encrypted. But 25 years ago, there was next to no encryption, and therefore monitoring of networks and understanding how threat actors operated within an environment or within a network was relatively straightforward. Because it was transparent, we were using clear text protocols like FTP and others. Classic open source tools like Zeek for network traffic analysis. You might be familiar with Snort and Suricata, which are open source intrusion detection systems. Wireshark for packet capture analysis. These are all very useful for looking at open, clear network traffic and understanding what was going on within those traffic flows. Unfortunately, the world has changed. I say unfortunately, fortunately and unfortunately, the world has changed quite significantly. So nothing stands still. Encryption now is very much the norm. I typically hang my hat on that 80% of all internet traffic is now encrypted. Like I say, that can flux depending on whether you're talking about internal corporate networks or demilitarized zones or the internet itself. But encryption ultimately is the norm. Cloud native apps, rather than that traditional client server architecture, is now absolutely the norm. Work from anywhere, especially with COVID, has become commonplace. And we also have blueprints like Zero Trust, SASE, Secure Service Edge, which makes the design of both networks and of cyber programs much more complex. And we've had the movement from in the endpoint space, from managed endpoints to unmanaged endpoints, bring your own device, back to managed again. So there's a huge flux and change in how devices are controlled by an organization. This is also compounded by, especially in the OT space, kind of digitization of everything, or the move towards digitization of a lot of infrastructure and tooling. Threat actors are using very powerful attack tools. On the dark web, there's a big zero-day market out there, and obviously rising conflict. So these two things combined together, or these two, let's say, silos, are creating this perfect storm, which is greater complexity from a defense perspective and greater risk from a threat actor perspective. So then the question really is, does network monitoring still offer defenders, blue teamers, a compelling vantage point to defend against their organizations, especially with the likes of the rise of encryption? And this is a question that I have to continually ask myself on a daily or even a weekly basis. So if we take some of the kind of bigger vulnerabilities and malware that have happened in the last few years, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but both Log4j and SolarWinds, the Apache and Alibaba Foundation, as well as Mandiant, cited that network evidence was absolutely crucial, not for just finding these vulnerabilities and understanding the malware, but also creating the detections that would go out into detection tooling to ultimately make detection of these threats significantly easier for organizations. So that kind of underwriting itself, I think, helped move the answer to my question forward a couple more steps to where it was at the very beginning. So the key thing, I think, to take away from network security monitoring as a practice in general is, outside of the move towards securing the endpoint, securing the cloud, or securing the different perimeters in general, is that threat actors, especially if you subscribe to something like Zero Trust, where you always assume breach, attackers really cannot avoid leaving traces on the network, regardless of what they do, whether if we're talking about this from a MITRE perspective, through infiltration, exfiltration, lateral movement, and other components, there's always going to be artifacts left on the network itself, either from a passive perspective or from an active attacking perspective. So we need to think differently about the way that we collect network evidence. For a long time, the move from monitoring to, let's say, proactive or even reactive detection was commonplace. So the move from network security monitoring to intrusion detection or intrusion prevention, that was kind of very commonplace, I suppose, around 15 years ago or so, especially with the rise of next generation firewalls and other components like that. So if we have threat actors that are circumventing EDR, they're circumventing intrusion detection systems and other components, we need to look at it more from a broad collection perspective, to actually understand how they're moving within organizations. Encryption is a big topic. It's a question I get asked quite a lot, which is, if 80% of my traffic is encrypted, what is the point of a network security monitoring program? Now, the great thing is, even if the majority of network traffic is encrypted, network encryption still creates vast amounts of telemetry that security analysts, incident responders can use to understand what has happened within those traffic flows. So encryption creates artifacts, You can use a lot of different techniques to understand what is going on within encrypted traffic without actually looking at the payload itself, which is what traditional network next generation firewalls and those types of products that have traditionally done, which is to deal with encrypted traffic, we need to break and inspect. We need to decrypt, analyze, and then re-encrypt. I think we all need to understand that with modern encryption techniques like TLS 1.3 and certificate pinning, that simply is not going to be able to happen realistically within the next 2 to 3 years or so. So encryption will become the norm, and the ability to decrypt will become near on impossible. Therefore, looking at encrypted traffic and then providing inferences is probably the best way to address that kind of rise of encryption, and also the need for privacy and the privacy advocate side of the house. So you can do things such as like detect brute force detections by looking at spacing between packets and sequencing of timestamps. DNS over HTTPS is a known exfiltration technique by threat actors, and detecting that and understanding the algorithms that are in place, again, are absolutely crucial to a good security monitoring program, to a security operations center, or just for analysts to do their jobs in general. Now, the move from the traditional campus network design that I was always kind of taught, the 3-tier or 2-tier model, to more modern day architectures like cloud first programs, Kubernetes and containerization, they present new opportunities that can lead to really good understanding of the organization. So Kubernetes is a great example. The deployment of containers and the deployment of ephemeral environments where something may potentially exist one day or 1 minute and then be destroyed or disappear the next moment or the next day. Monitoring of that to a deep level and storing that data for a long period of time gives network defenders or security analysts a great vantage point, because something may happen, a rogue container by a threat actor may get stood up 3-5 days ago, maybe even longer, 6 months ago, and get torn down very, very quickly once it's not used anymore. Collecting, logging that container, storing it, then means that security analysts can retrospectively go back in time, query the logs in their SIM tool, their data lake, or wherever it is that they're storing logs, to actually get a full picture or a historical picture of what has happened within these ephemeral environments, in these environments that are ever changing, ever scaling, growing and contracting, and so on. So you're getting great insights into these types of environments, both the infrastructure as a service players like AWS, Azure, GCP, or the ephemeral types like containers, Docker, and Kubernetes, and so on. So in the market itself, there is a change, especially in the last 12 months or so, where network security monitoring 15, 20 years ago was very much commonplace and very heavily utilized. And then the swing to endpoint with the rise of EDR from endpoint protection programs or antivirus. We're now seeing drives from the major incident response companies like Mandiant, like Deloitte, and others, CrowdStrike, Microsoft with their XDR plays, that are starting to realize that securing the endpoint like it used to be securing the network perimeter simply is not good enough anymore. We have to move back more towards, let's say, back in towards the organization, back into the network, into the data center, into the cloud, to combine both endpoint data and network telemetry to really get a broad visibility of what's going on within organizations, so that network defenders or blue teamers have all of the tools, have all of the data and the evidence that they need to truly understand, as an example, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, or truly understand how advanced persistent threats or even relatively small threats are operating within the organization. So endpoint is absolutely great for finding, blocking, defending 90% of threats. Most threats do start with the endpoint in some way. But for those unmanaged endpoints, the OT environments, the IoT environments, the cloud environments, and then deeper into the network and the data center, I think I answered my question, which is network security monitoring still has a very strong place within a security program to help defend as efficiently as possible. So final slide from me. In terms of a good network security program, when I've built NSM programs in the past, data quality is absolutely crucial. Just taking net flow records like a mobile phone bill simply doesn't cut it. You need more security-focused metadata or even packet capture. That's what security analysts need to do their jobs effectively. Encryption absolutely isn't the end of the road. The end of break and inspect techniques is problematic, but there are solutions out there that can help with that. New app architectures do provide a great vantage point for collecting network evidence, and also the likes of Zero Trust and Secure Service Edge can be an opportunity, not an obstacle for collecting network evidence. And the key thing, I think the most important point that I would like anyone to take away from this is even the most skilled adversaries have to leave artifacts or have to leave traces on the network in some way, shape, or form. And with that, a good network security monitoring program is always useful to understand how a threat actor has operated within an environment, either pre-breach or post-breach. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to me today. I'm happy to take any questions.